Hello and welcome to What's New in Android, or as I, the only person, like to refer to it as the Android keynote. I'm Chet Haas from the Android UI Toolkit team.
And I'm Romain Guy for the graphics team.
And I'm Dan Sandler from the System UI team. And we don't have a lot of time, so let's get to it. Are you ready for What's New in Android? Here's where we left off last time, API 25. So we're just going to grab that git SHA there, pop it into git diff, and then, all right, off we go. You're going to want to write this down. OK.
Next.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Right.
OK.
I love those.
Oh, man, remember we almost made that in enum? It was hilarious.
You got that?
You think this is what people came for? I don't know why we didn't think of this before. So we've been doing this talk. We've been telling you what's new for years, and you can see that I forgot my blazer. Actually, no, I had a lovely red blazer, but somebody borrowed it for the keynote. You've got your...
It looks like you're menacing me.
But this year, it was a little different, right? You had developer previews well in advance, so you've seen a lot of these APIs before. You had the Google keynote, where we showed off a lot of really exciting stuff. We had a developer keynote, where you learned about even more developer stuff. So what are we doing here? What is the point of what's new in Android?
Existential crisis.
So, did you test this clicker?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
Think of this talk like a wine tasting or a whiskey flight or one of those soda machines that you can push all the buttons on. This is an artisanal, hand-picked selection of things you may have overlooked in the new release of Android, things you're going to need to do no matter what to be part of Android O, and, well, honestly, just things we'd like to talk about when we're on stage. So with that, this is really what's new in Android specifically, what you might have missed in the developer preview or the I/O keynote or the other keynote, and why you should care. One last thing that I want to make sure we get to today is this. Everybody's always excited about this, but we're going to hold that for the end.
It's going to be good.
All right, let's get started. Romain, talk about UI and graphics.
Yes, let's start. So the first feature we want to talk about is one that you saw this morning in one of the keynotes. Chet, this clicker does not work. You didn't test it.
You know,
Wasting time.
You know, I'm going to stand back here and I'm going to do the slides for you.
All right, go to the next slide.
This
please.
is why they didn't want to give us a clicker.
Right. So a feature.
It works for me.
Just go back there. Don't want to see you. So the first feature that you saw this morning in one of the keynotes, picture-in-picture, is not just for TV anymore, it's also for your phone. So here we have an example of a third-party application, Netflix, running on your phone, picture-in-picture. Give me that clicker.
Let's move back. There we go.
And it's really easy to implement in your application. You just have to modify your manifest. And stop playing the animation, please. You just have to say supports picture-in-picture true. You don't need in O the resizable activity true attribute anymore. And you should also test configuration changes. And in your code, when you want to enter the picture-in-picture mode, you just have one line to call. You get your activity, and you call enter picture-in-picture. Super simple, and it's going to make your user super happy. Then a feature that's very dear to my heart, it's color management. So we're adding support for wide gamut displays in O. It's not going to be on all devices. Only devices that support the feature will enable it for your application. We're adding support for 16-bit PNG files, so you can have wider colors, more saturated colors. We support ICC profiles, so color profiles embedded in bitmaps, in JPEGs, PNGs, and WebPs. It will ensure accurate rendition of colors across multiple screens. We also have a bunch of new APIs, but we're going to talk about that more at the end of the week in a different talk. So because a picture is worth 1,000 words, this is color management and how it works. I hope it's clear. But really, the color management is about something you've probably experienced with your own application. Your colors look different across devices, so we have solutions for you in Android O. So if you want to know more, there's going to be a talk that I'm going to give on Friday at 11:30 on stage 2. It's called Understanding Color. Next, we're also adding support for multiple displays. If your application is already that clicker is horrible. If your application supports multiple windows already, the multi-window mode, it already supports multiple display in O. When a phone is connected or an Android device is connected to multiple displays and you have an application that's compatible, the user can choose to send your application on a different display. When this happens, you're going to get a resizing configuration change. You can also control on what display your activity shows up. You can use the activity options for that. And you should really test your app if you want to support this feature. To help you with testing, we have 2 new developer tools. You can run ADB Shell dumpsys display. It will list all the current available displays on the device. And if you call ADB Shell start with your activity intent, you can specify the display on which you want to start the activity. It's a very easy way for you to test this. There's a lot more to those APIs, so we encourage you to go to the office hours on Friday and Thursday, the office hours for Windows and activities. Next, media. So we have a lot of very useful classes in our media package. We have the media player, the media recorder, the extractor, and the codec. And we added a new getMetrics API on every one of those classes. It helps you query information about the media that you're dealing with. So you can query the resolution, the codec, the bitrate, the duration, this kind of data. It's super easy to use. Just call getMetrics on one of those objects. You get a persistable bundle, and you can look up the documentation on developer.android.com to know what kind of queries are available. Playback is also much improved. You now have control over the buffering in your application. So you can specify a low and a high watermark. So the playback of the video will not start until you reach the low watermark, and the system will do its best to keep cache data between the low and high watermark. And you can specify the watermarks in duration or amount of data in size. We also improved seeking. So when you seek into a video, you can now choose the behavior. Do you want to seek to the closest frame, to the next keyframe, to the previous keyframe, or to the closest sync frame? And finally, we made DRM playback with the Widevine a lot easier to use in all of your applications. For recording, until now, the Media Mixer only lets you add 1 video track and/or 1 audio track. Now you can have as many audio and video tracks as you want. You can also create custom tracks. The MIME type has to start with application/, and it's basically a sideband where you can encode any kind of data you want. So a canonical example is to encode gyroscope data if you want to be able to replay a 360 video or something like that. WebView comes with really useful new APIs. We've added the ability to use safe browsing that you know and love from Chrome that detects malwares and unsecure web pages. So if you add this tag in your manifest, this metadata tag, it's going to use the same backend and the same API that Chrome itself uses to secure the browsing experience for your users. The WebView uses now multiple processes, and in particular, there's a render process. So we also have new APIs to deal with those multi-processes. So if the render process crashes, you can use the termination handle API to detect the crash and decide what to do in your application. You can crash your application if you want. You can try to restart the WebView, or you can just log something and show a message to the user. It's much more graceful than before. You can also use the renderer importance API to better deal with the low memory situations. So when the system is low on memory, it's going to try to reclaim RAM from somewhere, and you can tell the system whether your WebView is very important or not that important to your application. So if the WebView is critical to your application, you should definitely take a look at this API.
So you know it's the right button, right?
Yes, I know that.
So there were a couple of long-requested features for animators, specifically for animator sets. They were deceptively tricky to implement, so it took a while. But now in Android O, we have the capability in animator sets of having seeking. So now if you have an animator that's a collection of child animators, you can seek within those child animators in the overall animator set. So yay. We also have the ability to reverse.
Hey, Chet, didn't you try to implement those APIs a while ago?
Maybe.
And who implemented the APIs in the end?
Not me?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So new capability, again, in animator set to reverse. So you no longer have to set up a separate animator set with all that functionality and get a listener and all that. We do all that tedious work for you. So yay. Autofill, because it's really tedious to get all that information correct over and over. We saw this in the keynote earlier. It's the ability to, you've got a form to fill in. There's a provider that can give you that information. So when you get those text fields, we can automatically enter that information for you. And there are a couple of different aspects to this. One is that you can certainly implement your own service and provide that capability, or depend on service that we are providing instead, or more typically, you will implement a client of that. The standard views just work. If you're using text view, if you're using edit text, we know how to receive this information, interact with the service already, so you don't need to do anything for standard views. If you're using custom views, or if you want to provide more information about standard views, we have APIs for providing hints to us about what the value types are, as well as APIs to tell us more about your custom views and how you want to interact with that. Also, if you have a custom view hierarchy, let's say you have a surface view where you have views inside of there, but all we know is that there's a surface view, then there are APIs for you to tell us about the virtual hierarchy that you want us to interact with. There is going to be more about this in a session on Friday morning, so go to that if you want to learn more about autofill. And now let's talk a little bit about text. There's been a bunch of stuff going on in the text arena this time. I think we can rewrite this. There we go. I only use that font because it hurts Dan. It just physically hurts him. It's awesome.
I think you broke him.
All right, so first of all, you can use XML to declare font information using sort of a neat hack with data binding, but it's kind of tricky to do, and why shouldn't we actually provide that capability for you? So now we do. So you can now actually put a font file directly in this new resource font directory. Yay, indeed. So put that in the directory, or you can tell us about the font family, so you can provide several fonts with information about the styles of each, and then you can just use those directly as you could any other resource. And from code, you just say, give me that resource, and away you go. Downloadable fonts. Now we have the capability for you to declare a font that you want to use that we will then download and cache on the system for you if it is not there yet. Or if it is on the system, then we'll use it from the cache. You can do this from code or from XML and use it as a resource, just like you did in XML fonts on the previous exciting slide. And we also have a font provider that we are providing in a not yet released version of Google Play Services. There is a beta version of that available at the conference this week. I don't know the details on that, but there's a session where you can learn the details, or you should be able to go to the Play Services website to learn more about that. And this gives you access to all of Google fonts. So if you just want to use one of the standard ones, such as that beautiful font I used to kick off this section, maybe that's in there, then you can ask for that directly from the service. Also, there's the ability to have auto-sizing text view. So typically, if you resize a text view,
you never know what's going to be like the hit, right?
Text. Text is cool, especially when it's in the right font. So what you get now is the behavior on the left there, where we're just resizing the view itself. There's no change to the font. But on the right, if you opt into the auto-sizing text view behavior, then we're going to resize the font for you. And you can specify the behavior, the step increments that you want to use, or the specific sizes that you want to snap to as it resizes. So there's APIs for that. There's APIs in both XML as well as Java programming language codes. So knock yourself out. And for all of these text features, XML fonts, downloadable fonts, and auto-sizing text view, they're talking about all of these in the What's New in Support Library session tomorrow morning. And you're wondering, why are they talking about it in a Support Library session? Aren't these O platform APIs? Yes, they are. And they are also in Support Library. So you can use all of these capabilities going back on earlier releases. Accessibility service utilities. If you're writing an accessibility service, great thing to do. We have new capabilities that you can take advantage of. Language detection, the ability to put a button in the navigation bar along with the other buttons there to make it easier to access your stuff. Separate volume control for accessibility volume, so you're not conflating that volume with other volumes on the devices. And also the ability to define custom gestures, custom fingerprint gestures. If you want to learn anything more about these, there's a session this afternoon on accessibility that you should check out. And finally, one of my favorite really tiny changes I'm going to say tiny because it's one line of code for the API, but the actual CLs that went in to fix all the code that was dependent upon the former implementation was huge. So I don't want to detract from the work from it, but API-wise, really tiny, kind of hidden, kind of looks like the same thing from the outside. The way find view by ID used to be declared was something like this: public view, find view by ID, and then you call that, you pass in your resource ID and get back a view, and then you immediately cast it into what you want. So text view, you have to tell it's a text view on both the left and the right, and there's parentheses, and it's a big bother. People use helper libraries just to get around the fact that this looks so horrible. So now, we have this. I call this feature Castaway. I think I am the only one that does so.
All right, blew past my first slide. That's fine. I want to talk a little bit about some of the UI, system UI stuff you're going to look at. If you have an app, you're going to need to know about adaptive icons. I think this got like barely a mention in one of Steph's slides earlier today. But essentially, this is we're trying to save you time and money. There are so many launchers out there, and each one of them has a different recommendation for the shape of your icon. So adaptive icons is a new piece of technology that we have brought to you in O that allows you to say, here's my background, here's my foreground, cut it out to whatever shape you like. So even if the launcher has a circle, or it's got a round rectangle, or it's got something awful, you have an icon that matches exactly the local flavor. There's going to be a ton more information about adaptive icons at a talk on Thursday, and definitely go to that one. All right, let's talk about shortcuts and widgets, because Launcher is also a part of System UI. Previously, to get shortcuts and widgets on the user screen, there's a broadcast for shortcuts that sort of kind of works, and for widgets, you just have to beg the user, please, please, see if you can find our widget inside the launcher. In O, you can now actually request one of these things to be pinned to the user's workspace, using Shortcut Manager for shortcuts, using App Widget Manager for widgets. And the user then gets the opportunity to say, no, I don't want that on my desktop, or yes, I do, and in fact, I will go ahead and place it exactly where I want it. Or they can just say, sure, find a spot for it, which was the previous behavior. So now you don't have to walk the user through a long flow, you just send them right into this dialog. It's super convenient. Look at all the new users you're going to have on your widgets. I can just say I'm pausing for applause when I'm really futzing with the clicker here. This also we'll talk about on Thursday at 4:30. All right, notifications. You knew it was coming. They're super useful. They're great for engagement. Users love them. They're maybe a little out of control. There's a lot that is being used in the notification stream right now, and it's very hard for you to get your message to the users that want it, and it's very hard for a user to manage the inflow of demands on their attention. If it's out of control now, the user should always be in control. That's been a principle of ours since the beginning. We added the ability to block notifications from a package in Jelly Bean. And Nougat, we refined a little bit and added quietening. But all through all this, our users, the #1 request we get from users is, OK, but can I just block some of an app's notifications? On the other hand, the #1 request we get from developers is, could the user just block some of my notifications? It's the same thing. Everybody's been asking for the same thing. And this is where notification channels come from. It's a new API in O. A channel is a named category of notifications from one app that all share this same behavior: vibration, sound, light, whether they pop up on screen, so that the user has explicit and fine-grained control. So as an app, you'll get to set up all your own channels, defining the default behavior for, a private message should pop up, and a tag maybe doesn't pop up, or it's got a lower priority. And then users, when they long press a notification or use the new slide gesture to look at it, they can see what channel it's on and make changes right there in line. Once you target O, if you take nothing else away from my 2 minutes here, take away this: you have to use channels for every notification, or they will be dropped. So until you target O, you can start slowly evolving your notification system over to channels. Once you target O, they have to all be channelized, because we're trying to get to a consistent experience where the user knows what they're going to get. And we're going to talk about that and a lot of other great stuff, including design considerations, all the code that I didn't put up there, whatever that little blinky thing is over there, on this talk at 4:30 tomorrow. There's a lot of other great stuff coming to System UI. We have listed some of it here. It ran off the end. Again, I like doing that with slides. And I encourage you very much to check out the developer previews or install the beta and play with all of it. We're really proud of it.
All right, new APIs for you as developers. So we expanded on the strict mode API that I'm sure you're all using in your debugging. So now on the thread policy, you can get warned when you're using unbuffered I/O. So if you use an input or an output stream without wrapping it into one of the buffered stream, you'll get a flash or whatever it is the trigger warning you've set. On the VM policy, if you don't tag your sockets, you can also get warned. Tagging sockets is really useful to do traffic debugging using Android Studio. And finally, if you open another intent, if you send an intent to outside of your application and you need to grant permission, you can also be warned. So it's really easy to use. It looks like the previous APIs we had. Media file access. So one of the, we introduced the document providers a while ago, a couple of releases ago, and they're extremely useful, except when you have large documents. If you have a large document, you needed to download the entire data before you could pass it to the callers, to the user of the document provider. So now you can create seekable file descriptors. It's extremely useful for audio, video, or any large type of content. It's also extremely easy to use. So you get a storage manager, you open a proxy file descriptor, you give it a callback, and then we're going to invoke your callback to request the size of the document, to request some amount of data in a byte array, and then we're going to tell you when to close it. Cache data. So this is new APIs that the system gives you to be a better citizen. So each app has a certain amount of data it can use in the cached partition. And when the system runs out of space, out of storage space, it's going to start deleting some of your cache data. So if you stay below the quota that you're given, you can avoid your data being deleted. For this, you can use the storage manager. You can query the number of bytes that are allocated to your app. You should query that from time to time because the quota can change depending on how much of the quota you use or how often the user uses the application. Then when you want to allocate data, you can just use allocate bytes. You could do it yourself, you could just create a file, you could just create an output stream, but it's much better to do it this way because when you go through allocate bytes, if needed, the system will delete another app's cache data to make space for your data. So that means that get cache quota bytes might be bigger than the free space that's left on the device. You can also use something called set cache behavior tombstone. So this is very useful for your app to be able to tell the difference between a file that was never cached and a file that was cached but deleted. So when you set that behavior and the system deletes some of your files in your cache, it will truncate the file. So the file will still be there, but the size will be set to 0. That tells you that the cache was deleted by the system. And finally, the usable space and the allocatable space are different.
There's a lot going on in Android security in this release, and we only have a little bit of time to talk about it. I wanted to highlight some of the privacy improvements that are new in Android O. If you've been using Android ID, you need to know now that it is going to be different for every app, for every user on the device. So it can't be used to track users between apps on the same device anymore. Similarly, if you've been reflecting into system properties to get net.hostname, it is empty now. And so if you're saying, well, I really need advertising IDs to be able to send users the correct contextual advertisements, that is what the advertising ID API in Google Play Services is for. So go check it out in Google Play, but you cannot use Android ID, you can't trust it anymore, in the same way you might have done. I had a slide here about WebView, but then Romain took it. One other thing I wanted to mention about safe browsing in WebView is because WebView is now pushed to the Play Store every 6 months, you will be able to opt into safe browsing features as far back as Lollipop, which is fantastic. We also saw the unveiling during the keynote of something we're calling Google Play Protect, which is actually a lot of technologies that we've had in place before, but really haven't given the visibility that they truly deserve because we are watching out for people all the time. So any device with Google Play has Protect enabled. Every app that gets uploaded to Play is pre-screened and continuously rescreened for each new version that's uploaded. And every time you install an app, where you have Play Protect set up, that app is going to be screened as well, even if you got it from another store or from ADB install. And we're really excited about this. There is so much more to talk about. In Android security. They gave me a whole slide deck of stuff, so I said, why don't you have your own talk? I actually didn't say that. They had their own talk anyway. On Thursday at 2:30, you're going to go and find out what's new in Android security from soup to nuts, everything from kernel hardening all the way to more stuff about WebView.
Language and runtime. I think you already know what I'm going to say. So this morning, we announced official support for Kotlin. You saw Steph on stage, and I see her sitting right there in the hallway. So if you see her at I/O, go say thanks. So Steph and the whole team behind her did an amazing work over the past, however much time to bring you this. So go thank her. She'll pass your thanks along to the whole team. So it's available today in Android Studio 3.0. There's a lot of documentation already online. I could spend hours talking about Kotlin and why it's good for you, why it's good for us. Actually, should I hijack the talk?
Actually, he really could. He does, in fact.
But unfortunately, we don't have that much time in this session. So instead, I invite you to come on Friday at 10:30 here on this stage. There's going to be a talk called Introduction to Kotlin from Andrei Breslav, the lead language designer at JetBrains, and Hadi, VP of Developer Advocacy at JetBrains. And then in the afternoon, on stage 4, we'll have Life is Great and Everything Will Be Okay, Kotlin is Here, by Christina Lee from Pinterest and Jake Wharton from Square. So, and this is important to us because the reason why we brought you Kotlin is because you, the community, is using Kotlin. We listened, we heard you, we're bringing you what you wanted. So we wanted to have you, the community, on stage to talk about it better than we can. Also, if you have questions, you can come to the Developer Sandbox at the Android Core Platform booth. Today from 3 to 4:30, on Thursday from 2 to 4, and on Friday from noon to 2 p.m. Andrei, the language designer, will be there to answer all your questions. So please come if you want to know anything about Kotlin. Just go there and go ask your questions. Now, like Steph mentioned, we're also doubling down on our other languages, so the Java programming language, and we also have C and C++. So for the Java programming language, we're adding new packages in Android O. We have java.time that finally makes manipulating time and dates easy, and it makes sense. It makes a lot more sense than the other APIs. We're also, yeah, it's about time. We're also bringing you java.io.file. It improves on the good old java.io.file API. It lets you access the attributes of the file. It lets you easily manipulate paths and read files. We'll look at an example. And finally, java.lang.invoke. It's a slight variation on reflection. This is a gross approximation, but it's really cool because it lets you transform and wrap method handles in your application. So here's an example of the new Files API. So you can use the path class to get a path. And then you can just call files.lines. It will read the entire content of the file. You're going to get a stream. So in this example, I'm using lambdas and stream APIs to remove all the empty lines, all the lines that start with the pound sign, and then I collect everything back into a single string at the end. So it's a lot easier than it was before.
All right, some changes in runtime. We heard about some of these this morning, and there's more about it this week. New concurrent copying collector, making everything basically faster and better. Concurrent copying means no pause time except when there's a full GC. So it can do all the stuff that it needs to do in the background while you're doing other stuff. In particular, one of the really cool things that it can do is actually compact the heap in the foreground. So previously in Art, I believe in the previous release, it had the ability to compact the heap, which is really good. It can defragment it, it can make the heap smaller, it can make allocations and collections faster, but it could only do this when activities were in the background. So it would go into an idle state and then sort of do it when it was in that idle state, but when it was in the foreground, there was nothing that it could do about the expanding and fragmenting heap. Now it can collect in the foreground, defrag in the foregrounds, and everything gets faster. There's also a new, faster mechanism for allocations. So it can just do bump pointer allocations, which is way, way faster. Collections are faster, and all of this essentially results in less jank for you. So faster to allocate stuff, faster to collect stuff means that just dealing with garbage and memory in general is much faster using Art in the O release. Lots of various optimizations, loop unrolling, inlining. One of the things to note is that Dalvik was created with a constraint of memory tight constraints, right? Like everything was about saving memory with Dalvik, which means that it could only do so much optimization. It sort of reached the end of its life as far as what they could do to optimize things. When ART came online, they basically put in a platform upon which we could build future optimization. So we're starting to reap those benefits now, where with every release, including O and future releases, we're going to be able to do more and more. And there's a bunch of them in this release, and you should check out a session later in the week for more information on that. Also, there's Dex locality. This in particular improves launch time for activities because we can collect all the memory in the same space, so it's easier and faster to access as your application is starting up. So there's a session on Friday morning, performance and memory improvements, so check that out for more particulars there. So beyond the platform, we have support library, we have other mechanisms for delivering things that aren't just about the O release. We wanted to call out some of those. There's the V26 beta release that comes out with Developer Preview 2. The stuff that we already talked about in text, fonts in XML, downloadable fonts, as well as auto-sizing text view, those are all in there. You can check those out. In addition, there's something that we call emoji compat. So one of the big issues that we have with emojis is that if your friends are sending you emojis that are from some future standard than whatever we shipped on the release that you're running, it's not possible for you to see those emojis, and you're going to see tofus instead, which, given some of the emojis I've seen, may be more attractive, but not very meaningful. So wouldn't it be nice if you could actually get updated emojis on your device? So now we have two mechanisms that apps can use to get updated emojis. One is that apps can actually bundle with updated emojis, so they can update the apps to the Play Store and then to their users, so that the users get more timely updates of these emojis. The other, and probably better, certainly long-term solution, is to actually use a service that we can provide through downloadable fonts that we talked about earlier, where they can automatically get updated fonts through downloadable fonts, right? So the app can build in the capability to use the downloadable fonts capability to have updated emojis as we provide them into the service. So again, go to the What's New in Support Library talk tomorrow morning to learn more about all of those. We also had more stuff going on in animation besides the small stuff in Animator Set I talked about earlier. We have the ability to now have physics-based animation stuff. So if we want to see that in animation form, the ability to have essentially animations driven through velocity. All of the animation capabilities that we have in the platform to date have been driven around the idea of a duration. You tell it how long you want it to run for. But many animations, you really want to drive it by the velocity. In particular, animations that are driven by user interactions. You're dragging something on the screen and you let go. Wouldn't it be nice if it took off from your finger at the same velocity that you were dragging it when you let go? So flings, scrolls, all that stuff, it really require a velocity-based animation system instead. You can do that with the animators, but it's really tedious. It requires math. Math is hard. And so we've baked in that capability to this new physics animation system that is more natural, more interactive, and more interruptible, because it was really intended to work with that user interactivity model. Here's a small demo of this. So as we're dragging the top thing around, the other two circles are essentially hinged to the top one through springs that you defined. And so they follow it in space. They're not lockstep following it, but they're basically on springs that are attached. And they immediately benefit from that interactivity and that physics-based notion of these springs. So there's a talk on this on Friday afternoon, all about the new physics-based animation stuff. Please come to that if you want to know more about that. Architecture components, this was mentioned in the keynotes. We thought that maybe sometimes Android development is a little bit harder than it needs to be. So we took a step back and said, okay, what are some of the major problems that we should take another run at to try to simplify this for app developers? And a couple of those that we've taken specific runs at right now are around lifecycle. It is apparently kind of hard to deal with the fact that your activities can die at any time when you rotate the screen, or it goes in the background, or whatever, and finding out exactly what state you're in can be a bit tedious. It is an ongoing issue that all app developers need to deal with. So we've taken another approach to that to make that much easier. And in addition to that, we've also taken a look at persistence. So you can issue raw SQL now, and that's about all you got on the system. So we have a new way of doing that that builds on that capability and makes it easier and more powerful. We're going to talk about all of those this week. We're going to have an introduction to architecture components I would encourage you to go to this afternoon. That's actually immediately after this session. And then tomorrow morning, we're going to have one on the life cycle problem and how we've solved that. And we're also going to have one on persistence and offline. And all of these are bits that you can actually try out in an early release form already. So check those out. Hopefully, it'll make your developer lives easier. There are some behavior changes, some of which you're going to care about more than others. There have been some changes to the behavior of background applications, in particular location. If you are running as a background application, you're only going to get coarse-grained location information. All of these things are being done not to make it harder, but to make the devices better, right? If all applications have all capabilities at all times, and they can do whatever they need to or want to at any time, then essentially you're going to run the battery down because everybody's doing too much work all the time. So we're trying to be judicious about which applications actually need the services at which times so that we can make the experience for the user much better, the experience for your users much better as well. So one of those is in location, coarse-grained information when you're in the background. Another one is wake locks. We noticed that it was common for an application to go into a background state and then into a cache state, and it would have a wake lock at the time, and it would just keep that wake lock, and it would hold it for a very long time, and that really runs the battery down. So now, sometime after you go into a cache state, the wake lock is automatically released so that it doesn't put the device into that unseemly state. And also there are limits to execution when you're running in the background. There have also been changes to alert windows. In particular, there's this new type of window called Type Application Overlay. If you are targeting the O SDK, then this is the window type that you must use if you want to have an alert window capability. If you're on earlier releases, obviously that didn't exist, you're not going to use this. Just know that whatever window type you are using is going to be layered under one of these Type Application Overlay windows because we have a more clearly defined layering policy now with that. There is more information about this afternoon at 5 o'clock, background check and other insights. So please come to that if you want to know all the details about that. And then finally, we promised to get back to this, didn't we?
We did. This is our one more thing, right?
All right. So we were going to talk about this, and I mean, we have to have a drum roll, don't we? How about like a thigh roll? Do we have a thigh roll? All right.
That sounds nice.
Unfortunately, I'm looking at the timer on stage, and I'm going to say that O stands for. Oh no, we're out of time. Thank you.